The dry Nevada air seemed to sigh as Elliot Carter's jeep inched its way across the rugged terrain, leading to the base of Red Mountain. He didn't believe in legends. The Mountain Demon, as it was called, was nothing more than an invention by the locals to keep tourists away from volcanic crevices that could be dangerous. But he wasn't there for stories. It was a job like any other. Analyze sulfur dioxide emissions and check for signs of a possible future eruption. Beside him, Jake was scribbling frantically in a notebook. "Have you heard about this, boss? The roar, they say, echoes off the mountain at night. They say it chills you to the bone," commented Jake with a sparkle in his eyes. Elliot snorted, not taking his eyes off the road. "Roars? Jake, I work with seismographs, not ghosts." Further ahead at the top of the trail, Nia Rivers waited. He wore worn-out hiking boots, and his stern gaze contrasted with the youth of his face. As soon as the jeep stopped, she walked towards Elliot, shaking her head in disapproval. "You took a long time," he said, without greetings. "The mountain is no place to play, especially at night." Elliot exited the vehicle, checking his wristwatch. "We're right on schedule, Miss Rivers, unless the Mountain Demon has its own schedule," he replied sarcastically. Nia crossed her arms, ignoring his tone. "My grandfather used to say that the devil appears when the earth takes its last breath before dawn. Don't joke about things you don't understand, Dr. Carter." The interaction made Jake uncomfortable, but also more curious. The young assistant seemed fascinated by the stories Nia carried. And before we continue with this intriguing story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This helps us bring more content like this to you. Now let's get back to the story. They started the climb. The air around them smelled of sulfur, and the winds seemed to carry a distant murmur, as if the stones were whispering ancient secrets. Jake took photos, occasionally tripping over rocks, while Elliot analyzed graphics on a tablet. Nia, however, was restless. Her eyes constantly scanned the horizon, as if searching for something only she knew was there. "What's the problem?" Elliot asked, finally noticing his expression. "This trail, it's one of the few that passes close to the oldest crevasses, place where the devil likes to appear. The wind doesn't sound normal today," Nia replied hesitantly. Elliot shook his head impatiently. "The wind is further proof of geological activity. There's no need to involve demons in this." As the sun sank below the horizon, a tension seemed to build in the air. Nia insisted they set up camp before dark, something Elliot reluctantly accepted. They found a flat place, surrounded by rock formations that blocked the wind. That night, while the group was eating dinner, Jake asked Nia about the myth of the Mountain Demon. "They say it's a spirit? A monster? What exactly is he?" Nia sighed, staring at the fire. "It's difficult to say. My people believe it is an ancient entity, born of fire and stone. Some say he hunts those who disturb the land. Others believe he is the earth." Elliot rolled his eyes, but before he could make another cynical comment, a sound cut through the night. It was a deep and serious roar, echoing through the mountain. It had a strange, almost metallic hue and seemed to come from deep within the earth. Jake dropped his spoon. "Did you hear that?" Elliot hesitated for a moment. He wanted to dismiss it as just the sound of volcanic pressure escaping the cracks, but the fear in Nia's eyes made him reconsider. "Everything is fine." "It's probably a release of gas," he said, trying to sound confident. Nia didn't respond. She slowly got up and began to put out the fire. "If we want to survive this night, you must not attract attention. Absolute silence. And please don't try to explore anything now." The two men exchanged glances. Nia's serious tone made even Elliot shut up. As the night progressed, the group lay silently in their sleeping bags. Elliot felt the weight of darkness around him. The roar echoed again, but this time it seemed closer, accompanied by a slight tremor in the ground. He looked at Jake, who was frozen in fear, and then at Nia, who was holding a stone necklace, muttering something in her ancient language. Elliot didn't believe in demons, but for the first time in his career, he felt that perhaps he wasn't just dealing with science on that mountain. The night on Red Mountain was a test of nerves. Elliot, who had always prided himself on his rationality, found himself fighting the urge to believe what his senses were telling him. He kept his eyes open, trying to ignore the noises that seemed to slowly approach him. The roar, increasingly audible, brought with it a rhythmic sound, like heavy knocks against the earth. Jake couldn't bear the silence for long. That's not gas, is it?" he asked, his voice shaking. Nia looked at him sternly, pressing her finger to her lips in a universal gesture of silence. "Don't talk. Don't attract attention." But Nia's words seemed insufficient to quell the growing terror. Elliot stood up abruptly, grabbing a flashlight. "I'm not going to stay here waiting for a shadow to swallow us. It's some kind of geological event, and I want to understand what's going on." Nia grabbed his arm with surprising strength. "You don't understand. This is not something your science can explain." Elliot, irritated, broke free of her grip and began walking. "I'll be back in 5 minutes. Jake, stay here with her." Jake hesitated, torn between following his boss or obeying the guide. "Elliot, is this really a good idea?" he asked, but his voice died when he realized that the geologist was already out of reach of the flashlight. Nia sighed heavily, her hands shaking as she held the necklace. "He'll wake you up," she said, almost as if talking to herself. Elliot's flashlight illuminated a small circle of rocky terrain in front of him. He walked slowly, feeling the ground tremble slightly beneath his feet. There were no sounds other than his breathing and the distant echo of his roar. He reached one of the larger crevices, which spewed hot steam and glowed with a reddish light. Elliot knelt, using equipment to measure temperature and record gas emissions. He talked to himself, trying to ignore the growing discomfort. Just accumulated pressure? Nothing more than that. But then, something changed. The surrounding wind stopped. The silence that followed was unnatural, as if the very air had been swallowed. Elliot felt the ground shake harder, and suddenly he heard a new sound, a deep, guttural growl coming from the depths of the crevasse. He took a step back, his flashlight shaking in his hand. It can't be. An intense glow emerged from the crack, as if something was moving within. Before Elliot could react, an immense figure began to rise. It was something that defied logic, a creature made of stone and fire, with eyes that glowed like embers. His skin seemed to melt into lava in some spots, and his body exuded a suffocating heat. The roar that escaped his throat made Elliot's heart stop for a moment. He stumbled backwards, falling onto the rocks as the creature looked in his direction. Jake and Nia were in tense silence as the shaking intensified. "That's not normal," Jake muttered, standing up. "We have to go after him." "No," Nia said firmly. "If you leave now, you will also be caught. He has already attracted attention." Jake couldn't contain his indignation. "You can't just wait here. He's my boss, my friend." Before Nia could respond, a scream cut through the air. It was Elliot. The sound of his despair reverberated through the mountain, making Jake run towards the sound without a second thought. Nia swore in her native language, grabbed a ceremonial knife from her backpack, and ran after him. Jake caught up with Elliot near the crevasse. He was on the floor, shaking, his flashlight thrown to his side. But what caught Jake's attention was the creature. She stood tall, colossal, with eyes that seemed to pierce her soul. "My God," Jake whispered, unable to move. The creature took a step toward them, each movement making the ground vibrate. Nia appeared right behind Jake, pulling him away. "Don't look into his eyes!" she ordered, pointing the knife in the creature's direction. "Is this real?" Jake shouted as Nia dragged him away. Elliot finally managed to speak, his voice hoarse with panic. We can't face him." Nia ignored his words. She began to recite an ancient chant, her words rhythmic and steady. The creature hesitated, as if the words were bothering it, but it didn't stop moving forward. Elliot tried to get up, but his body didn't seem to obey. What does he want?" Naya gave him a dark look. You. He hunts the intruders who disturb the land. The group retreated, trying to reach the camp, but the creature followed them, its size making it impossible to lose. In a moment of desperation, Nia stopped and faced the monster, raising her ceremonial knife and screaming in its language. "You two, run!" she ordered. Jake tried to argue, but Nia's fierce expression left no room for debate. "Go!" As Elliot and Jake ran, they heard the loudest roar yet, followed by an impact sound and Nia's scream. Jake stopped, turning around. "We can't leave her!" Elliot, shaking, grabbed Jake's arm. "We cannot do anything with it. We need to get out of here." Elliot's words were cold, but he knew they were true. They continued running, the creature's roar echoing down the mountain behind them. Upon arriving at camp, Elliot and Jake realized they were completely alone. The lantern lights were dim, and the sound of heavy footsteps still echoed in the distance. Elliot looked at the horizon, feeling for the first time the weight of his choices. "She sacrificed herself for us," Jake whispered, tears streaming down his face. Elliot didn't respond. He knew that Red Mountain would not let them leave alive. Elliot and Jake sat in the camp, panting and immersed in a heavy silence. The mountain seemed to have become darker, as if the light of the moon and stars were not allowed to touch that place. The echo of the monstrous roar still reverberated in their minds, like a nightmare from which they could not awaken. Jake wiped his face with shaking hands, his breathing ragged. "It's our fault," he murmured. "Nia said not to come here. She knew this was going to happen." Elliot remained silent, his eyes fixed on the darkness around him. His hands gripped his knees as he struggled to find a rational explanation for what they had just experienced. His mind, so accustomed to numbers and measurements, refused to accept what his eyes had seen. Finally he spoke, his voice hoarse and low. "We need to go down the mountain. Now." Jake looked at him in disbelief. "To descend? With that thing chasing us, we won't survive more than 10 minutes out there." Elliot didn't respond. He knew Jake was right. The monster, whatever it was, seemed intent on hunting them. But staying at the camp was not an option. Marks on the ground around them showed that the creature knew exactly where they were. "We need a plan," Elliot said, more to himself than to Jake. "The only plan we have is not to be found, and even that doesn't look very promising," Jake replied, his voice filled with fear and irony. While they were arguing, a familiar sound caught their attention. Light, hurried footsteps, accompanied by heavy breathing. Elliot and Jake looked at each other, grabbing flashlights and pointing in the direction of the sound. From the darkness, a staggering figure emerged. It was Nia. His shirt was torn, and a deep cut was bleeding on his shoulder. She looked exhausted, but still carried the ceremonial knife. "Naya!" Jake exclaimed, running to her to help her. Elliot stood still, surprised to see her alive. He didn't know whether to feel relief or worry. "Are you well?" Elliot asked with a tone of disbelief. Nia just shook her head, trying to catch her breath. "I managed to distract him, but he won't stop. He wants you." Jake helped Nia sit up, while Elliot tried to understand the situation. "What do you mean, he wants us? Why us?" Nia looked up, her expression serious. "Because you violated the mountain, not just with its presence, but with its technology, its perforations. He feels it like an invasion." Elliot took a step back, his voice rising a notch. "This is ridiculous. We're here to monitor volcanic activity, not invade anything. For you, perhaps, but to him, everything you do is an attack on the Earth." Nia squeezed the necklace in her hands, as if seeking comfort. "The only way to survive is to give something back to the mountain." Jake frowned, confused. "Give it back? Return what?" Nia hesitated before answering, as if she didn't want to say the words that were about to come out of her mouth. "A sacrifice." Silence fell like a stone between them. Elliot shook his head, enraged. "This is crazy. Sacrifice. We are in the 21st century. I will not accept this kind of primitive superstition." "Then die," Nia replied, her voice full of frustration. "You've seen what he can do. Do you think you can escape? The mountain will devour them before they reach the foot of it." Jake, still holding Naya's injured shoulder, looked at Elliot. Elliot, what if she's right? What if it's the only way? Elliot pointed a finger at Jake, furious. No, I'm not going to throw my life away for a ridiculous legend. Let's find another solution. There is always another solution. But Nia wasn't willing to argue any further. She stood up, stumbling a little, and looked at the two of them with eyes full of anger and sadness. You came here knowing the warnings. They ignored everything because they thought they were above it. Now they are reaping the consequences. She started to walk away, leaving Jake and Elliot behind. I'll try to push him away one more time. Don't do anything stupid while I'm gone. Not long after Nia disappeared into the darkness, the ground began to shake again. Jake and Elliot heard the unmistakable sound of the monster approaching, heavy footsteps, harsh breathing, and the guttural growl that seemed to come from deep within the earth. Jake grabbed Elliot's arm. He's coming! What are we going to do? Elliot looked around desperately. He knew they couldn't face the creature directly, but escape also seemed impossible. Finally, he pointed to a nearby rock formation. There! Let's hide! The two ran, barely managing to keep their balance as the earth shook beneath their feet. When they reached the rocks, they dropped to the ground and turned off their flashlights, trying to become invisible in the darkness. The creature appeared a few seconds later. It was even scarier up close, its body radiating heat and light as its red eyes scanned the area. Each step caused the ground to crack, and the smell of sulfur filled the air. Jake covered his mouth with his hands, trying to control his breathing. Elliot at his side closed his eyes, silently praying that the monster wouldn't find them. For a moment, it seemed like the plan had worked. The creature hesitated, looking around as if sniffing the air. But then she turned her head towards them, letting out a roar that made the surrounding rocks shake. Elliot opened his eyes, terror written all over his face. He found us. The creature raised one of its enormous hands, covered in molten lava, and struck the rock formation where they were hiding. The rocks shattered like glass, and Elliot and Jake were thrown to the ground by the force of the impact. As they tried to get up, the creature roared again, preparing to attack. At this moment, Naya appeared out of nowhere, positioning herself between them and the monster. "Run!" she shouted, raising the ceremonial knife. Elliot and Jake hesitated, but Naya's gaze was unmistakable. She didn't intend to get out of there alive. With no choice, the two began to run, leaving Nia behind as the creature advanced on her. The sound of the clash, the monster's roar, and Naya's screams echoed across the mountain as they fled into the darkness. Elliot and Jake ran as if their lives depended on it, because, in fact, they did. Red Mountain seemed alive, with the ground shaking beneath its feet, and the echoes of the creature's roars reverberating in the distance. Jake's heavy breathing was a constant reminder of how close they were to physical exhaustion. Elliot, despite his age and inferior resistance, led the escape, guided by a primordial instinct for survival. They eventually came to a clearing surrounded by smaller rock formations. Jake fell to his knees, struggling to breathe. "We can't continue like this," he exclaimed, breathless. "We don't have a plan. We don't know where to go." Elliot, also exhausted, rested his hands on his knees, trying to ignore his tiredness. "We need time. We just need time to think of a way out of this." "And Nia?" Jake asked, his voice breaking. "She sacrificed herself for nothing?" The mention of Nia brought a heavy silence between the two. Elliot knew that if they were alive, it was thanks to her. But that didn't alleviate the guilt he felt. He finally broke the silence, his voice hard. "Nia made her decision. Now, it is our responsibility to ensure this is not in vain." Jake shook his head, frustrated. "And how are we going to do that, Elliot? With your science, your graphics, none of this helps us now." Elliot didn't respond. He knew Jake was right. For the first time, he felt the crushing weight of his helplessness. As they rested, something caught Jake's attention, a narrow opening between the rocks, almost hidden by the undergrowth. He pointed. "What is that?" Elliot approached cautiously, shining his flashlight into the space. It was a narrow cave with walls covered in ancient marks, like rock engravings. The images showed human figures facing a creature that looked eerily similar to the monster that was chasing them. "Looks like we found part of the story," Jake said, trying to hide the nervousness in his voice. Elliot studied the engravings more closely. They showed scenes of rituals, people offering objects or even themselves to the monster. In some images, the monster appeared to move away, but in others, it devastated entire villages. "It's a cycle," Elliot muttered. Jake looked at him, confused. "What? The creature is not just a legend. She is part of the mountain, a guardian, or a punishment. When someone upsets the balance, it appears, and if it is not appeased, it destroys everything around it." Jake approached, his voice full of anxiety. "So what do we do? Do we need to do some kind of ritual? Offer something?" Elliot turned to him, his expression grave. "I don't know, Jake, but I know that if we don't figure it out quickly, we won't survive." Inside the cave, the two found objects that seemed to be part of ancient rituals: stone necklaces, clay bowls, and even bones. Elliot felt a chill when he realized that the bones were human. "Nia mentioned a sacrifice," Jake said hesitantly. "Do you think that's what she was talking about?" Elliot shook his head, trying to dismiss the idea. "No, let's not come to that. There is another way." Jake, however, seemed increasingly convinced that sacrifice was the only solution. "And if there isn't, what if it's that or we all die?" Elliot ignored him, focusing on the markings in the cave. He found an engraving that seemed to highlight an alternative: human figures using the stone necklaces to summon the creature. But instead of sacrificing lives, they offered something that appeared to be fire or energy. "Maybe we don't need blood. Maybe we can offer something that symbolizes power, life." Jake frowned. "Like what?" "The lava." Elliot pointed to the engraving. "That's what she is. Fire, heat, energy. If we can redirect one of the rifts to release more energy, we might be able to appease it without needing a human sacrifice." Elliot began to explain their plan: to use the equipment they had brought to create a controlled explosion in one of the larger crevasses, releasing enough energy to calm the creature. Jake looked skeptical. "This is crazy, Elliot. What if we just make her angrier?" "It's a risk we need to take," Elliot replied, determined. Jake wasn't convinced, but he had no other ideas. He helped Elliot set up the equipment while they monitored the surrounding sounds. The creature seemed to be getting closer again, its footsteps echoing closer by the minute. "We need to be quick," Elliot said, setting the detonators. As they worked, Jake looked toward the horizon and saw a huge shadow moving among the rocks. "She's coming." Elliot felt panic rising, but continued. Just one more minute. The creature emerged from the darkness before they were finished. Its body glowed with an intense light, and its red eyes fixed on Elliot and Jake as if it already knew they were trying something. Elliot yelled at Jake, "Activate the detonator, now!" Jake hesitated, but before he could move, the creature hit the ground, throwing them both away. Elliot hit a rock, feeling a sharp pain in his shoulder. He saw Jake trying to crawl towards the detonator, but the monster was advancing quickly. It was then that Elliot made a decision. "Jake, get out of here. I'll distract him." "What?" Jake shouted in shock. "Just go. We don't have time to argue." Before Jake could argue, Elliot grabbed one of the stone necklaces from the cave and began running in the opposite direction, shouting at the creature. "Hey, here! I am here!" The creature turned, attracted by the sound and the glow of the necklace. Elliot kept running while Jake finally reached the detonator. Elliot looked back as the creature followed him, its breathing heavy and eyes blazing with fury. He knew he had no chance of surviving, but he hoped his distraction would be enough to give Jake the opportunity to complete the plan. "Come on, Jake. Make it work," he muttered to himself. The moment the creature was almost upon him, a rumble echoed across the mountain. The explosion lit up the sky, and Elliot felt the ground shake beneath his feet. The creature stopped, turning toward the light. For a brief moment she hesitated, as if considering the outburst an acceptable offer. Elliot fell to his knees, exhausted as the creature slowly disappeared toward the illuminated crevice. But he knew that this was not the end. The explosion lit up the sky over Red Mountain, sending up fragments of rock and a wave of heat that seemed to engulf everything around it. For a moment, the creature stood still, staring at the flash of lava escaping from the crack. Elliot watched on his knees, his chest rising and falling in frantic breaths as the monster seemed to take the explosion as an offering. Jake ran up to him, visibly panicking. "Elliot, did it work? Is he leaving?" Elliot shook his head, trying to catch his breath. "I don't know. It looks like it's hesitating." The creature let out a guttural roar that made the earth vibrate again. It wasn't a scream of anger, but something deeper, almost like a lament. She slowly advanced towards the crevasse, her glowing claws scratching the ground as heat radiated from her body. "This could be our chance," Elliot said, his voice shaking. "If the explosion was enough, maybe we can escape." "And if it wasn't?" Jake asked, eyes wide. Elliot looked at him, his expression grave. "Then we're dead anyway." As they watched the creature, a familiar sound came from behind them. Quick, heavy footsteps. Elliot and Jake turned, ready to face another danger, but were surprised to see Nia limping and with an expression of pure determination. "Are you still alive?" she asked, her voice tired. Jake ran to her, offering support. "Nia, how did you manage to escape?" She shook her head, deflecting the question. "It doesn't matter. What matters is that he's still here." "What did they do?" Elliot quickly explained about the explosion and the attempt to redirect the mountain's energy as an offering. Nia listened silently, her eyes fixed on the creature who now seemed indecisive, standing near the illuminated crevice. "You are fools," she said finally. "That won't hold him for long." "What else can we do?" Jake asked, almost in despair. Nia looked at them, her expression hardening. "There is only one way to end this. You know what it is." Elliot felt a knot in his stomach. "Sacrifice. No, I will not accept that." Nia stepped forward, her voice cold and firm. "It's not a question of accepting it or not. It's the only way." As Nia spoke, the creature let out another roar, turning its attention back to the group. Her red eyes glowed with a renewed intensity, and she began to move forward again, her steps becoming heavier and heavier. Nia turned to Elliot and Jake. "Listen, this thing won't stop until it's appeased. My people knew this. That's why we never come here at night. We always respect the mountain, but you broke the balance." Elliot felt the guilt weighing down on him, but he refused to give up. "There must be another way. We need to think of something." Nia held onto the stone necklace she wore as if it were her last anchor of strength. "You brought destruction to this place. Now they need to decide who pays the price." Jake looked at Elliot, his eyes full of fear. "No, we can't do that." Elliot shook his head, his mind racing for another solution, but the creature was getting closer, its overwhelming presence sucking away any hope. The decision came suddenly. Nia placed the stone necklace around Jake's neck, and he froze, shocked. "You're young, but you can't carry this alone." Then she looked at Elliot. "And you are responsible for this." Before either of them could protest, Nia began walking towards the creature, her ceremonial knife in hand. "Nia!" Jake shouted, running after her. Elliot tried to hold him back, but Jake broke away. "We can't let her do this alone." The two ran after Nia, but she was already facing the creature, who stopped, looking at her curiously, almost as if recognizing her courage. Nia raised the knife, muttering in her ancient language, "I offer my life, so that the mountain finds peace." The creature tilted its head, its eyes glowing even more brightly. Jake arrived in time to try to pull her back, but Nia pushed him away. "You need to live to tell what happened here, to prevent this from happening again." Elliot watched, paralyzed by the mixture of fear and respect. He knew Nia wouldn't come back. With a firm movement, Nia buried the knife in her own chest, her blood staining the volcanic rock floor. The creature roared, but this time the sound seemed different, almost like a wail. She leaned over Naya's body and slowly her glow began to fade. The earth shook one last time before stilling. The creature dissolved into smoke and lava, returning to the rift as if it had never existed. Jake fell to his knees, sobbing. She's gone. Elliot walked over, placing a hand on Jake's shoulder. He had no words to console the young man, only the certainty that Nia had saved their lives. Silence took over the mountain. Elliot and Jake stood there, looking at the crevice where the creature disappeared, trying to process what had happened. Finally, Elliot spoke, his voice low. "We need to get out of here. Take her story to the world." Jake nodded, wiping away his tears as he stood up. They began to descend the mountain, leaving Red Mountain and Naya's sacrifice behind. But Elliot knew that night would never leave them. The descent from Red Mountain was a silent and tense crossing. The sky was beginning to lighten, but the weight of events still hung over Elliot and Jake like a shadow. Every step seemed to echo Nia's last words, and the void left by her sacrifice was crushing. Jake stumbled several times, his feet heavy with exhaustion and guilt. Elliot, who was normally the most pragmatic and cynical, looked equally dejected. The two avoided looking at each other, as if they were afraid that any exchange of words would open up an abyss of emotions that they were trying to suppress. Finally, the sound of birds breaking the morning silence brought them back to reality. They reached the base of the mountain where Elliot's jeep was still parked. "We're alive," Jake muttered, almost in disbelief. Elliot glanced toward the horizon where Red Mountain rose, imposing and seemingly asleep again. But at what cost? The road back to town seemed endless. Jake was slumped in the passenger seat, staring out the window as Elliot drove in silence. The atmosphere inside the jeep was heavy, filled with memories of what they had witnessed. When they finally arrived at the small gas station at the entrance to town, an attendant came out to greet them. "Are you okay? It looks like they saw a ghost." Elliot didn't respond immediately. Instead, he got out of the vehicle, filled the tank and bought 2 bottles of water. Jake hadn't moved yet. The attendant tried again to pull conversation. "You were on the Red Mountain, didn't you? Strange place. I heard that bad things happen there." Elliot stopped, finally looking at the man. "Bad things? Yeah, you have no idea." The attendant frowned, but did not insist. Jake finally left the jeep, and the two entered the small coffee beside the post to try to eat something. While waiting for the coffee, Jake broke the silence. "What are we going to do now, Elliot? How do we explain this?" Elliot sighed, running his hands over his face. He was exhausted, both physically and emotionally. "I don't know. I'm not sure if anyone would believe us, even if we contained the truth. But we need to try." Jake leaned forward, his voice full of emotion. "Nia sacrificed to save our lives. If we don't tell what happened, it's like her sacrifice in vain." Elliot looked at Jake, seeing the young assistant in a different way. For the first time, he realized the determination in his eyes, something that contrasted with the fear they had shared on the mountain. "You're right," Elliot said finally. "But we need to think about how to tell this story without being discarded as crazy." Jake nodded, but seemed relieved by Elliot being willing to try. Back in town, the news of Nia's absence spread quickly. Local residents, especially the members of the Paiute tribe, were in mourning. Nia's grandfather, an elder named Jorah, confronted Elliot and Jake in the small central square. "What happened to my granddaughter?" asked Jorah, his voice loaded with pain. Elliot hesitated, but knew he owed the truth to the man. He explained everything: the mountain exploitation, the creature's awakening, and Nia's sacrifice. Jorah heard in silence, his hands squeezing a staff hard. When Elliot ended, the elder said, "She knew this could happen. I always knew that the mountain requires respect. You came here without hearing the warnings, and she paid the price." Jake tried to intervene. "We didn't want that to happen. She tried to save us." Jorah raised his hand, silenced him. "The mountain now sleeps again. But for how long? It depends on you. Don't let her sacrifice be in vain." In the following weeks, Elliot and Jake began working on a detailed report on Red Mountain events. But instead of focusing only on scientific aspects, they decided to include local stories and Nia's role. Elliot, who was always skeptical, felt his perspective change. He finally understood that science and beliefs did not need to be mutually exclusive, that there were strengths in nature that could not be measured by graphics and formulas. Jake, on the other hand, became an advocate of local traditions. He started working with the Paiute, helping to preserve his story and ensuring that the Red Mountain was protected against future explorations. Nia's story was included in academic publications and reports. Although many doubted the truth of the accounts of the creature, her sacrifice has become a symbol of respect for nature and the mysteries she carries. Elliot, in particular, was deeply marked by experience. He retired from field expeditions, but continued to work as a consultant, always remembering his colleagues of the importance of respecting the territories and cultures they exploited. 5 years have passed since the night the Red Mountain revealed its dark secrets. Life went on to the survivors, but the marks of that experience remained deep, shaping the ways that Elliot and Jake chose to follow. Jake has become a tireless defender of environmental preservation and protection of sacred territories. After the publication of his book, entitled The Voice of the Mountain, he gained notoriety for his approach that combined science and respect for ancestral cultures. He was also primarily responsible for organizing a memorial for Nia Rivers at the foot of the Red Mountain. The place consisted of a polished obsidian stone, recorded with a poem written in the Paiute language, translated into the English below. He who hears the earth must take care of it, for the earth hears too. Every year, on the anniversary of Nia's sacrifice, Jake led a ceremony at the scene, bringing together native Paiute, scientists, and curious. During these events, he shared the story of Nia's courage, making sure no one forgets his act of altruism. Elliot Carter changed radically after the events on the Red Mountain. He abandoned his active exploitation career and became an environmental policy consultant, working to regulate research in territories with cultural or spiritual significance. Although it avoided the spotlight, he devoted much of his time to visit universities and lecture to young scientists, emphasizing the importance of balanced scientific progress with respect to nature and people. He kept in touch with Jake, although he preferred a more reserved life. The rare times they were talking again about the Red Mountain, they both agreed that they could never fully explain what happened that night. It was something that transcends logic and that they learned to accept. The Red Mountain has become a protected area, declared natural and cultural heritage by state authorities. The intervention of Jake and Paiute leaders helped ensure that the mountain was never explored for commercial or scientific reasons. Legends on the creature continued to circulate, fueled by reports of strange sounds and inexplicable tremors that still occurred from time to time. For the natives, this was a reminder that the mountain was always watching, always alive. A group of scholars suggested that events could have natural explanations, but no one dared to investigate further. The risk of awakening something so terrible again was too high to pay. A quiet morning, Jake returned to the Red Mountain to the Nia Memorial. Beside him was a young woman with long hair and bright eyes, Mia Carter, Elliot's daughter. Now 20, Mia had become a biology student, inspired by the stories her father finally shared on the mountain. "It's weird to be here," Mia said, looking at the obsidian monument. "I feel like I knew Nia, even without finding her." Jake smiled, putting his hand on her shoulder. "She was extraordinary, a true guardian until the end." Mia lowered, placing a small stone at the base of the monument, a gesture he had learned from the Paiute. "My father said this mountain teaches lessons that we never forget. I think I'm starting to understand." The wind blown gently, carrying an almost imperceptible sound, like a whisper. Both Jake and Mia looked at the top of the mountain, where the red glow of the lava was visible against the blue sky. Jake squeezed the stone necklace around his neck, a gift from Jorah before his death. He felt a peace that came only from the acceptance of the unknown. "Come on, Mia," he smiled. It's time to bring this story to the world. As the two walked away, the Red Mountain remained eternal and vigilant, as a silent guardian of secrets that only she knew. What did you think of this outcome? Leave your opinion in the comments. We love to know what you think. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like to support our work. See you in the next video.